I think I found the real reason why the American Revolutionary War was started. And I think history's repeating itself. And it's not what they taught us in school. Because if you learned about the American Revolutionary War in school, you were probably taught about things like the Stamp Act, where the slogan was no taxation without representation. And sure, this is part of the story, but it's not the whole story. So what was it that the Founding Fathers were really most concerned about? Well, it definitely wasn't tea, and part of it was taxation without representation. But the big thing was actually money. If you notice, the Stamp Act was regulating all sorts of printed materials that had to be printed on stamped paper. So they were regulating printed materials. And the important part is that it had to be paid in British currency, not in colonial paper money. Because at the time, the colonists were experimenting with all sorts of their own kinds of money. During the 1700s, the colonists were free from English central banking that had been ruling their lives for the last 100 years or more, and they were inventing their own currencies by the people, for the people. And don't get me wrong, many of those currencies were garbage, and many of them failed. It was the Wild West. There were all kinds of problems with colonial paper money, but it wasn't controlled by the English central bank. And that was a problem. So Great Britain imposed all kinds of laws to try to regulate the paper currencies that were getting invented. And when the Stamp Act went into effect, because so much of these taxes had to be paid in British currency, it put a de facto end to much of this colonial paper money because businesses needed to pay their taxes in this currency. They couldn't pay it with this currency. This is how the British retained control of their currency until the Revolutionary War. It makes me think of one of the most famous quotes from a Rothschild. "Permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws." Mayor Anselm Rothschild, 1790. American history is vastly complex, and any TikTok is going to vastly oversimplify it. But there's a reason why they teach you about the stamps and the tea in school and not about the money. And while I was researching this, I kept on thinking like, the incumbent established governmental powers passing a bunch of regulation to try to regulate new currencies invented by the people? Weird, that sounds familiar. It's almost like people inventing new sovereign forms of money that aren't ruled by central banks and established power is a threat to the powers that be. I mean, it was kind of weird how for years and years and years, the SEC and Mr. Gensler gave no guidance as to whether cryptocurrencies were securities or not and whether or not they would be regulated. And then all of a sudden we're at war with cryptocurrencies. Besides, Gary Gensler is like a public servant. He's not like part of an entrenched, established financial elite at all. And I mean, come on, he was nominated by Mr. Joe B., who's literally uncorruptible and has no evidence of ever having done anything shady. Besides, Gary's an expert at finance, and he learned it from one of the most reputable organizations ever, who literally can't even escape Wikipedia calling them out, has been criticized for lack of ethical standards, working with dictatorial regimes, close relationships with the US federal government via a revolving door of former employees. I mean, lots of cryptocurrencies are trash, you know? It's the Wild West of new money. Kind of like paper money was back in the 1700s. And it kind of makes you think how different the world would look if we were all still using British currency and this had never happened. But if you work for the CIA and you're watching this, just know that I am not calling for a revolution. I'm just calling for education about finance. Like, the average person doesn't know shit about how money works, and they should. Sue me. And P.S. I'm going out in the woods again this weekend. I'll be gone for a little bit. Don't worry, I'm fine. I'm happy. I'm healthy. I have no intention to Epstein myself. Life is great over here. Y'all be good now. Drink some water.